So I want to talk about this right to protest stuff, freedom to assemble, and all this stuff, because it really does get out of hand at some point. I mean, obviously riots are illegal, but just these protests in general. So what if somebody forms this protest that 1 plus 1 doesn't equal 2? Okay, you see that a lot of these protests are really stupid. So let's just go for something that's like, let's just talk about this scenario. So these people, these thousands of people, they get paid to go protest, or they're just dumb enough to go protest that 1 plus 1 does not equal 2. They're crowding the city streets, chanting, all right. So I want to talk about the implications of a large-scale protest. Roads are shut down. Okay, they're losing profits. Okay, it hinders the capabilities of emergency services. Okay, the roads are crowded and stuff like that. Schools could be canceled. All right. Obviously, it's a major inconvenience and a danger. All right, even just a peaceful protest. Okay, so they really need to have a legitimate reason to be doing what they're doing. At some point, these things just have to be dispersed. Like, if they're running around chanting 1 plus 1 doesn't equal 2, okay, why would you allow all of these inconveniences and dangers to take place with something so absurd? Okay, it's just really dumb. So I think at some point, these people have to state what they're doing. Like, what are you gathering for? What are you protesting for? Like, are you just trying to impede on, the normal function of the community? Like, are you really trying to be a hindrance to, productivity and stuff? Or do you have an actual reason for this assembly, for this protest? Okay, like, what are you doing? Because otherwise, this stuff has to be dispersed. So that's for a peaceful protest, okay? Obviously, at some point, when these people don't have a legitimate cause, okay, you just have to disperse this stuff. It's an absolute problem. All right? Now, we know that most of these protests are not peaceful, especially coming from the Democrats with all their nonsensical, 1 plus 1 doesn't equal 2 kind of stuff. So what I'm saying is that these protests shouldn't be allowed, these assemblies, these disruptive assemblies shouldn't be allowed when there isn't a legitimate cause, okay, when the cause is either nonsensical or outright, like, criminal. Okay, you see in these protests they're chanting about committing acts of terrorism, talking about killing, political officials and stuff, and, like, violent rebellion and stuff like that, and then actually rioting and stuff. So they really need to just disperse this stuff. And I understand that it's a difficult thing to disperse a crowd of thousands of people. But, we have a whole military for that. And, like, at some point you just have to do something. Okay? So imagine if this big crowd of these thousands of people is going one way in the street, in New York City or whatever, blockading the whole street, and then they're met with the righteous opposition, okay? Like, a crowd of the righteous opposition meets them. You think they're just going to stop? Or do you think that's going to be a violent altercation coming from the Democrats? Like, there's this big flowing crowd of psychopaths going down the streets of New York City, okay, and then a crowd of righteous anti-protesters come up. Do you think they're just going to let this crowd of righteous anti-protesters stand their ground? Do you think they're going to move around them? Like, do you think they're going to stop moving because the righteous anti-protesters are standing their ground, in the way, which they're allowed to do? Okay, you can meet a protest with a group of anti-protesters and stop their path. They don't get to dictate this like path. Okay, they didn't get the rights to the streets of the city. Okay, they just showed up and started marching around. All right, so you could block their path and stand your ground, but do you really think that they're not going to be violent? Like, that doesn't really happen very often, and you see it a lot. Like, it doesn't happen often that a group of anti-protesters actually comes and, you know, protests against the psychopaths and, like, stands their ground and it's peaceful. Okay, it's usually a lot of violence coming from the psychos. And then the anti-protesters have to defend themselves, and then they get accused of stuff, and it's just stupid. So what I'm saying is that most of these protests are riots, okay, and they need to be dispersed, immediately when that stuff starts happening. They need to be dispersed when they start chanting about terrorism. It should be dispersed if it has a nonsensical basis, okay, or no clear basis, just seeming to just be for the cause of disruption. Like, I get the right to protest and the freedom to assemble stuff, but there are limitations. Just like the freedom of speech, there are limitations to the freedom of speech. Okay? Like the freedom of religion, the freedom to practice religion, there are limitations. If your religion is contradictory to the law, you can't do it. Okay? So, I just wanted to talk about all these crazy riots going on. How to explain the limitations of the right, the freedom to protest and the freedom to assemble, recognizing that these people are not abiding by the rules and these things should be dispersed, understanding the scale of the law enforcement operation necessary to actually disperse these protests and stuff, these riots. Obviously, that's why these cities, these democratic governments don't allow for the National Guard to come in a lot of the times because, they're compliant with this crime. Okay, so, it's going to take the military and, it's a large-scale dispersal operation. All right. And I just wanted to talk about that. So, to reiterate, for these psychopaths that try to manipulate what's going on and confuse people and throw accusations, I'm not talking about taking away the freedom to protest and the freedom to assemble. I'm talking about specifying what that actually means, just like the freedom of speech, just like the freedom of religion. Okay, it's not entire freedom. You know what I mean? It's called the freedom of speech, but it's the freedom of logical speech is really all it is. It's the freedom of logical religion. So peaceful religion, the freedom of peaceful speech and peaceful religion. You know what I mean? Non-damaging. Okay, so that same thing applies to these other freedoms. Okay, it's not complete freedom to do the stuff that's even horrible. All right, so that's all I'm saying. Okay, these riots need to stop. These disruptions need to stop. Okay, unless they have some kind of righteous cause, but obviously a lot of this stuff doesn't.